Welcome to A Photographer's Life, the channel that takes you behind the curtain into the world of professional architectural photography. Join us now for an episode with some of America's premier architectural photographers. Today's broadcast comes from a recent Zoom meeting of the Association of Independent Architectural Photographers. This discussion is led by AIAP Director Alan Blakely. We hope you enjoy the show. If you do, please let us know by liking this episode and subscribing to this channel. Now, on with the show.
Well, let's go ahead and get started here. This is a topic that June actually recommended last time we met via, I think Norman is the one that he texted or something like that. So, and since then, I've had contact with several who have said, yeah, let's talk about this because I'm not really sure how to approach this, or it's not working, or it's working wonderful. So, the topic of assistants and interns, as well as employees. I know some of you here have employees. Are you on a situation where they're employees that you send a W-2 to, for tax wise, or are they 1099 employees or independent contractors? Anybody that's got people? Yeah, Norm.
Yeah, I have both.
Okay.
We got a small staff here. Of course, I'm a business partner, and then we got a regular, and then a couple of guys that will shoot video for me. He's a cameraman, and we work quite a bit with them, and they're here in our office studio quite a bit. So they're 1099, but so we do it both ways. I don't actually have never had interns, so I'm kind of eager to hear about that, how it works for other people, but we've never had any interns here.
And Brad, I know you've got employees, don't you?
Yeah, I have an associate, a full-time assistant, part-time, somebody who was my assistant who wanted to sort of stay in the mix, who's working in a kind of part-time capacity.
Okay.
And then my associate, Lauren, does not have a full-time assistant. So she has freelancers. So we're doing W-2s and 1099s and we have had interns here and there. We had an intern last summer, but it was more of an intern for Lauren because my work doesn't kind of go too well with having an intern.
Yeah. Gene, you had your hand up there.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, I'm very curious on why the intern didn't work. Also, I guess what led me to ask the question is because now I'm growing and I need an assistant on shoots. And so yeah, although I'm a videographer, I started as a filmmaker, but people are hiring me as the photographer first. So I have to kind of outsource something that I love to do as well.
Yeah.
On a shoot. The reason I'm currently having difficulties because sometimes they're saying that they could do more than they actually deliver. And I'm wondering if you guys had any experience on how do you guys vet? How do you guys look at? Because now that I'm reading about like leadership, one of the biggest things that I've heard is hiring the right people. And that's where I failed from step one. So I was like, someone said, yeah, I want to do it. I want to learn, become assistant. I want to learn. I want to do. And then you teach them, but then the next shoot, they completely forget everything you taught them. And I'm going through this Groundhog's Day thing, and I pretty much went insane last year.
Well,
so, yeah. How do you vet? How do you source? How do you test?
That's really tough. Personally, I've had some really excellent assistants and some really terrible ones over the years. But while you were offline there for just a second, I was talking about interns, and I used interns for probably 12, 15 years on a regular basis. And it was because there were photography programs at universities near me that had students with, that were actually interested and prepared and wanted to be involved in a business like mine. That's just no longer the case. I haven't had a request for an internship for probably 5 years. And I think that, I hate to say it's because of digital cameras, but I'm not sure that anybody thinks they need to be an assistant anymore. They're just a photographer. And so that's a tough one. I'm not really sure what to say on that. Anybody got some thoughts?
June, I talked to other photographers in your area. That's a great resource. ASMP also has a list of photographer resources, and I think PP of A does, but I'd check out ASMP first. So this would be where I usually go to or talking to other photographers. Someone's got a list or people have used assistants, good and bad. And most assistants are or consider themselves to be photographers who assist to get experience or to make some extra money. I think probably the best assistant in DC, and he's the only one I know who's a professional assistant. I mean, yes, he shoots some stuff, but his career is he's a professional assistant. And boy, when you have him on a shoot, it's fabulous. The problem solving that he comes up with and the ideas that he has are things like you're just doink. I never would have thought of that. But he's a full-time professional assistant. That's a pretty rare thing to find. They're mostly photographers who are just trying to learn something, which is good. I also think that maybe to the point of where you were saying you teach them something and then the next time they've forgotten it, it may be that their interest in photography is in architecture. And so you're teaching them techniques and they're kind of like, or, lighting setups or whatever. They're kind of like, yeah, I'll never use this.
I had a feeling.
Whereas if you can find someone who perhaps they're a real estate photographer and wants to move up to, dealing with architects, things like that. Someone who's already got an interest in what you're doing, that's this specific part of photography, it's going to be much more attuned to what you're teaching them than someone who, they're a wedding photographer and they're just making a few extra bucks with you.
Yeah. Right. Totally. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's really interesting, Chris, because Al and I were talking before we started. I was talking about, shooting headshots and other things that we do here. I would think that someone interested in photography, I know for myself, when I was coming up, I wanted to learn everything. So when they pigeonhole themselves like that, I don't think that's something I want as an assistant. Here in Chicago, we have Columbia and they've got a intern programship where they're always looking to place people. So if you have any, artistic colleges like that in your area, you must have. You can call them, and they always have a photography program or a fine arts program where they're looking to place people to learn about lighting or photography or no matter what it is you're shooting. If you're shooting bricks, they'll send somebody. It's pretty extensive. So maybe source that.
I guess.
Go ahead, John.
I guess the biggest thing is how to test them to make sure they're a right fit. Like, I could Craigslist, I could post. So I'm getting them. I guess it's just how are you guys vetting them? Are you bringing them on a test shoot, or are you just taking their word on their first shoot that they come and assist you? And you're like, since you're like so focused on taking care of your client, you can't really like train them and then get your shot done, and it just slows you down with everything. So that's what I'm saying. How do you vet these assistants, interns, etc.?
I bet on I'll just interject and then I'll stop talking, but I bet on a small shoot where the client's not going to be there. The client's going to be there. That's a whole other level of pressure. So if it's someone that has not been personally recommended to me by someone who I really trust, then I vet on a shoot where, if there's a hiccup, I'm not going to look bad in front of a client.
Well, my first, I will say, sadly, I'm in the midst of doing this right now as of yesterday. But our process is a bit different and it's not going to be viable to everyone. My associate Lauren was my assistant for 5 years and then has been my associate for another 6. So she's been with me 11 years. Anton, my assistant after Lauren, was my assistant for about another 5 years, and he's now being a stay-at-home dad. And my current assistant, who I've had for the last year, gave her notice yesterday because she got poached by a big production house who was going to pay her 25% more plus health insurance and a 401k. Our vetting process is typically that I have looked to my assistant, and quite frankly, most people have been here for a long time. They're as much like family, and I don't think anybody leaves here wanting to leave me in the lurch. And how the vetting process typically is if you're going to leave, you find yourself your replacement. And I tend to have them do a lot of the initial contact and communication with the potential successors from the standpoint that I want them to speak with them candidly without my presence of what the job holds and what's going to be involved, because I don't want anybody mincing any words. And then typically after we've gotten it down to, a few people, then I kind of come in and knowing that they've sort of already been vetted, that they have the requisite skills, and now who's a good fit for somebody who's going to be traveling with me, year round. But it's quite frankly, it's not any fun. And we put out an ad, I think it was yesterday, and have 15 resumes from as far as Sao Paulo, Brazil, who say that they'll relocate to Columbus, Ohio, which I don't believe. That's all nice.
We all want to work with you, Brad. We'll all relocate.
Yeah. They'll relocate to Columbus, Ohio if I'm paying $70,000 a year for an assistant. But if I were paying $70,000 a year for an assistant, then my assistant I had wouldn't have gotten poached. But I will say, going back, my first real full-time assistant was somebody who was Ohio University student who came to me for an internship, who said, my final box I have to check is I have to go out and work in a studio. And so his spring semester of his senior year worked for us. And the only reason he was unpaid is because he was getting college credit for it. And the university said, his payment is his college credit that he's getting. And when he came to the end of his term, I said to him, what are your plans now? And he said, well, I guess I'll go look for a job. And I just spent the last 3 months training you. How'd you like to stay? And he ended up staying for about 3-4 years, and now is working in New York City and doing quite well for himself. So, it's not easier, and it's getting more difficult all the time. And I think Alan's very correct that the approach to our profession today is not the approach to our profession as it was, 30, 25 years ago, when I think most of us were getting into the profession, with the exception of our young soulmate.
So I got a question. Are we, when you're talking, June, because this is your question, when you're talking about an assistant or an intern, are you looking at at hiring somebody? Are you looking at an intern, working and their composition is their education? What are you looking for?
Um, I'm actually looking to pay someone to help me, on shoots. Because like for a drone, I'll need an assistant for VO, visual observer. When for photography, sometimes I need the assistant for photography, or sometimes someone to capture video. So I'm looking for all three. So I'm willing to pay them. It's just that I've hired maybe like 5 or 6 people, or yeah, something like that, where I'm like, okay, cool. They said they're interested. They give me this kind of resume, and I was like, great. I'll hire them on a shoot. And if I show you the videos that they gave me, they'll even agree. Some was like, wow, I feel so bad. I won't even charge you for this. And I'm like, I can't go back and shoot it. And
yeah, of course you can.
You know what I mean? So that's why I'm trying to figure out how to test and how to vet. And then sometimes, so it's like, it's so I'm willing to pay them. I just need them to, and then I just need them to deliver on what they said they could do. And so far, 4 out of 5 have not.
Yeah. June, have you asked to see a reel or any samples of their work if you're asking someone for video?
I have.
And you've seen good work and then they've come through with nothing.
Correct.
Acceptable.
Yeah, they'll make an excuse like, see, I come from the narrative filmmaking world, so storytelling, storyboard, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And shooting an event, maybe because I've been doing it for a while, it seems really easy for me. But shooting an event, they're like, oh, I didn't know how this is going to go. And I was like, well, I just still wanted 4K 60p. I still wanted you to shoot these certain settings. I still want you to, and they're like, didn't do any of that. And they'll make excuses because they're coming from the narrative and they say the excuses narrative. And I think what Chris said, maybe they just don't have a passion. And right when he said that, I was like, oh, he's a narrative filmmaker. He's doing short films. He's just doing this for a quick buck. It didn't turn out well. Oh, well, for him.
Yeah. I think what applies for both hiring photo assistants and also, video operators is you got to meet with them ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And depending on how important the shoot is, whether the client will be there, if there's other people on the team working, you got to sit down, you got to train them. You've got to go through and say, these are the settings that I need you to use for the video, and whatever it takes to make you feel comfortable that they're going to perform on that day is essential. You can't just hire somebody out of the, blindly basically and have them come in and hope they're going to do the job, because that's tremendous risk. And again, if you can take them on a shoot where there's less pressure, no client, test them out and make sure that they can actually do the job that you need them to do. It's worth the investment, I think, because assistants, I'm in Connecticut. I'm in Greece right now, but normally I'm in Connecticut. And, it's like $350 a day for someone to assist you. And of course, you have to pay more if they're going to shoot video or do second shooting for you. But, again, you've got to be comfortable that they can perform. And I would also recommend contacting the local ASMP chapter. If you're not a member, they often can, we have an assistance list that we maintain. And these are all people that are pretty much vetted, and you can get recommendations from other photographers, and all of these things will help you to feel a little bit more confident that they're going to do the job that you need. We have a couple people that are basically professional assistants in Connecticut, so that if you hire them, you'll pay more, but you'll definitely get a great result.
So I have vetted it. Well, the way that I vetted it was just looking at their reel. But like they said, it's a narrative. So I was like, oh, okay, great. But they're like storyboard and all that stuff. And no, this is an event. Just shoot it as is or whatever. So yeah, I got to figure out a different way to test them more realistically to the shoot than using their real music videos and short films. Yeah.
What I've done, June, we just put somebody on in December, a second cameraman, and I brought him into our studio, and I told him, I said, interview me. And I wanted him to do an edit. I gave him terrible answers. I gave him good answers. I made it difficult for him, and I wanted to see the result. Add the music, do the editing, add the photography. And I mean, that's how we put somebody through it, because I want to see him actually do it. And I never send any. Only once did I send somebody on a job that I wasn't on, and never again. But so
Okay.
if they're going to assist you, you got to be there.
Copy that.
It seems like there's a couple that we're talking a couple different lanes here too. I think there's a big difference between hiring somebody to carry gear and being a bag handler, and then to the other extreme is hiring a second shooter, and those are such different things. You could both call them an assistant, but the thing that I found with second shooters is that they may have a fantastic portfolio or reel or whatever, but they had all the time in the world to do that. They didn't have to do it under a deadline. And so I think testing them, like Norman was saying, I think it, even if it's just something simple, but a test where they have to think on their feet and produce something under the gun, that's really telling, because if you bring somebody in that's, had a whole semester to do something and you're asking them to do the same kind of thing in an hour, there's a world of difference there. And so I don't know. I tested years ago and had people do things like that. I haven't done that recently. I don't use assistants anymore. Really, my wife works with me and I travel light, and that's the business these days. But in the days when I used to carry a ton of gear and run a studio and all that kind of stuff, I went through assistants pretty quickly. We lost. Who did we lose here? Somebody.
Barry.
Barry. He got frustrated. Maybe he'll come back. It looked like he was home, so maybe he'll come back. Going back to interns, the way I found interns was to just find the university programs that were nearby, the photography programs, and there's a process that you typically have to go through to be registered with those universities in order to accept interns from their programs. And so they want to make sure that you're a legitimate business and that you are going to provide the right experience for their students and things like that. And some of the best assistants I ever had were actually college interns. So I think that's something I would highly recommend. The ASMP used to have on their national site an assistant's registry or directory or something like that. I don't see that anymore. Am I missing something on there?
If you go on ASMP and look under Find a Creative, there's a drop-down menu. One is Find a Photographer. The other one is Find an Assistant.
Okay. All right.
I got a question for you guys. Has anybody successfully hired a second shooter? I had an instance where I had a guy working to assist me, and I was in traffic and I had a job to do. And I texted him 6 compositions that I did not want him to do. So he meets my client. The 6 compositions he did? The 6 I texted him. Has anybody successfully had a second shooter? That'd be a dream to me, to be able to send out a second shooter.
Only in my particular case, where it's an associate who was my assistant for 5 years and knows how I work and what the expectations are and those type of things. But other than that, no.
Yeah. And go ahead.
I was going to say that I was shooting a massive house, 30,000 plus square feet. And I had an assistant that I'd worked with a lot, who then moved into the second shooter position. She was working independently throughout the house while I was shooting kind of the main shots. And so we would meet, frequently to kind of review what she was doing, but she was pretty much on her own. So in that context, I'm always there, but then I may not be directing her specifically, because that's, kind of the benefit of having somebody that you can trust.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
Norman, one thing I will say to you, because you're kind of in the Chicago area, is that one of my ex assistants moved to Chicago because his wife finished up her medical residency in Chicago, and they live in Chicago now. And if you ever find yourself in the need of a second shooter, he'd be fantastic.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Email me his name.
Yeah. Dustin. Yeah.
Yeah, please. That'd be nice. It's always nice to have somebody you can rely on. There was a guy that had a photo lab here, Bruce Starnberg, and maybe you know him. He's in Oregon now. But if I couldn't shoot something, I have no qualms asking Bruce to cover it for me. Just a fantastic camera guy, very professional. Don't have to worry about him stealing your client or anything like that. But he's in Oregon, so yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, I'll send that to you.
Yeah,
No problem. No, but and Dustin was my assistant for a good 3 years, and he's been in Chicago probably about 10, and he assisted for a while in Chicago, and then has picked up a group of largely interior decorator, interior designer clients, and he's very good.
Yeah, excellent.
And and he's a great guy. So
yeah, that's the key.
yeah. Well,
really
and
it's half of it right there.
I mean, I will tell you, Dustin, how he came to work for me is my assistant had left, and George Anderson, who was a photographer in Columbus, not an architectural photographer in Columbus, said, Dustin is, George is the kind of person who, Dustin was his go-to freelancer, and said, I think Dustin would benefit out of having a full-time position. And, and it was great for me. It was probably terrible for George. I mean, George did something that was not in his best interest because he lost his go-to but he knew, kind of as a fellow photographer, in Dustin's growth, to have a full-time position and working with me was a good thing,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I appreciate it. Send him along. I'd like.
I mean, it's interesting though. I don't think any of my assistants who came to me with a interest specifically in architectural photography. And yet, I mean, 3 of them are practicing architectural photographers at this point in time. And that's where I was kind of upset with the person who's left. I know she's not going to be happy. That sounds funny, but I mean, as we all know, our life is a roller coaster, and it's not, you get off that roller coaster and you go, man, that was fun. And then when you're not on that roller coaster, after a little while, you go, boy, I'd kind of like to ride on a roller coaster again.
That's so true.
And I just don't think she's going to be happy shooting stuff for Myers Inserts in the Sunday paper 5 days a week for a little bit more money.
I get that, and we got the greatest job in the world. We really do. And I never worry about, I'm going to put somebody else in business or composition. There's plenty of work for everybody. I mean, that's never bothered me. I get that a lot when I talk to other photographers. Well, I don't want to put somebody else in business. I don't need any more competition. If you got talent, you'll have work. Period. If you're good at what you do, you'll have work. And I've said it before, when someone's hiring an architectural photographer, they're going to hire Alan because of Alan's talent. They're going to hire Brad because of Brad's talent. They'll hire June the same way. It's not going to be based on price, or it's based on what you can do. And so I think there's plenty of work for everybody. I've never been troubled with that. But yeah, I'd be interested in meeting Dustin, because it'd be nice to have a second shooter. I could have used one a lot last year, and so it'd be nice.
June, let me ask you, what's your primary need as far as an assistant? Is it as a second shooter, or is it somebody to help you shoot?
It's like, for instance, when I am mainly shooting twilight, sometimes I'll set more than multiple cameras, and it'd be great to have them sort of babysit. But also, say for instance, if we go on a set and I'm like, oh, great, we'd love to set up a camera and continue scouting, then I could have the assistant set up one set of camera while I shoot another one. So something like that would be one. Yeah, I mean, and then of course, it'd be great if they know video. I could teach them that because that's what I started with. And then as far as drone visual observer, I could train them to do that. And also sometimes when I'm flying, I have the Inspire 2, which is, once flying the drone, and then I need another one controlling the camera.
Right.
So basically, the biggest thing is not like my bottleneck is not like finding. I guess my bottleneck is finding the right person or vetting them or testing them out. That's where my because people reply to ads, but I just need to figure out a system on vetting them. I'm just curious on how that goes. And if you guys have any of assistants in Los Angeles, like Brad said, or Norman, if you have anyone in LA, let me know. I'll love a few names.
Patrick McMullen. He doesn't do video, but he's wonderful. He assists Benny Chan a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, he's great. He saved my butt several times.
Nice. Thank you.
Sure. I'll send you his information.
Okay. Thanks, Barry.
For me personally, I use, another photographer a lot for video. Not a lot, I shouldn't say, but that's not something I do or offer. It's not a skill set that I'm comfortable with. And so I hire in video. And to me, that is such a crapshoot to hire a videographer because, like I was mentioning before, typically I don't have all the time in the world for them to get it right. The assignments, we have the assignment and it's gone. And if you didn't get it, it's not ever going to be there. So that's a tough one for me. And I don't know of a good resource for videographers because other than maybe just calling other photographers or talking to other videographers, I've got one here in my local area that is excellent, but that's been a tough one for me around the country is to find a videographer when I have a shoot where somebody says, yeah, we'd like to add video to this. And I'm kind of at a loss. And typically I have put that back on them and said, I'm sorry, that's not something I do. I can't really help you with that. So,
yeah, I've got two good video guys and they're part of our team. So if we're shooting in, Houston, they're coming with me because you got to have that consistency. And my clients like my ability to be able to direct. I mean, I started shooting the video, but it's difficult to shoot it and direct it at the same time. So I found using a cameraman is the perfect solution for that. And I've got a couple of good ones. So it's been, if we're doing architectural and video, they're coming with me. And we got that consistency with our work. So it's nice. And I think I said, did Pat do anything for you? I gave you Patrick's information, June, for editing. A while back. Yeah, Patrick. Yeah. He's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I want to just throw out one other thing. Forgive me because I had a gap. I was having breakfast. I thought it wasn't important for you all to watch me eat at a late night. The other part of being an assistant is knowing how to behave. So I just had a situation where, it could be far worse than not being technically proficient. I had a situation where, this wasn't worse than that. I had to shoot a dog on a golf course for a trade magazine. And it was going to be a proper portrait with a lot of high pressure. And I couldn't find anybody to go out to where I had to do it. I hired a guy who was well recommended. He was extremely competent as an assistant. He knew lighting better than I did and all the rest of it. However, he didn't know how to behave, even to the point where he handed the our subject, or the owner of the subject, the dog, his business card afterwards, which is just, I was gobsmacked. I just couldn't believe it. And he talked too much in general. He talked too much in many ways, and he had kind of a rough edge. He was very competent as an assistant. And so I'd never worked with him before, and I won't ever work with him again, for that reason. I just can't. And there were a few other things. So it was like that. So that's something that you can find out that potentially that doesn't have anything to do with testing their knowledge, is like what Brad was saying. You just have to interview them and see if they fit, because you're going to spend a lot of time together.
Yeah,
That's just a people skills issue, but boy, it can make all the difference.
Barry, can I interject something that for no reason other than pure humor? After I graduated, I moved to New York City and worked as an assistant, and one of the people I worked for was Arnold Newman. And when I worked with Arnold Newman, we did a portrait of the Princeton Institute, and we were there for a couple days. And it was me and another assistant. And Arnold was very good friends with the sculptor George Siegel. And he said to myself and the other assistant, "I'm going to go to dinner tonight with George Siegel. George Siegel is my friend. George Siegel is not your friend. I have to feed you. So you're going to come to dinner with George and I. You're not to talk to George. You're not to be part of the conversation. This is not your conversation. This is my conversation with my friend George, and you're there to be fed."
So did Arnold insist on suits and ties and things like that?
No.
Okay.
No, but I mean, my first job out of college was working for Richard Avedon. And we were to wear clean jeans, button-down shirt. In fact, I got in trouble once because I was painting the psych in preparation for a Gianni Versace shoot. And Arnold and Dick came in with what's her name? The Versace sister. And I had changed into a pair of red sweatpants to paint the site because I didn't want to get paint onto my clean jeans. And he brought them in to look at the psych, and I was in the sweatpants, and I was pulled aside after they left and told that if they ever saw those godforsaken sweatpants again, that I would be looking for another job. Yeah. I mean, that job was the best job I ever had and the worst job I ever had. I mean, it was hell 50 times over, but, you learned so much.
Like working for Annie Leibovitz, from what I understand.
Well, I was offered a job by Annie and by Dick at the same time and took the Avedon position. And as I spent more time in New York City, I realized that everybody and their brother had worked for Annie, and I never met a person who survived more than 3 months with Annie. But having Avedon on your resume open pretty much any other door that you wanted after that, because that was not the case.
Yeah. Well, I can tell a little story about Annie, not that I experienced it, but this is also, I think, as an assistant, or we're going to be talking about assistants, our behavior is important too, right? And so I had heard a story when Annie Leibovitz went bankrupt to the tune of $24 million, which is a problem I would have really been happy to have. They interviewed one of her assistants, a guy whose name now I cannot remember, who's a very successful photographer. I'll look him up in a minute. And he told the story, which I verified with him when I interviewed him once, that she was a screamer and he was her first assistant for 3 years. And she was cutting loose on him, and he just started yelling back at her, which he had never done before. And she just stopped, and she said to him, "Oh, it doesn't work on you anymore." And so he quit shortly after that. But what that indicates is that it's not necessarily completely unconscious, that behavior on the part of the photographer and her photographer. And it was that kind of behavior that I think would lead to what Brad said, that a lot of people had cycled through.
Yeah, when you have your assistants, I mean, you have them signed. Like we have a release when they're working with us that they're on our staff. They can't promote themselves or their work or their independence or anything like that. I mean, and then anything they do obviously belongs to it. We own the copyright too. If they were to actually fire a frame or video something, that's important to have all that paperwork too. The other thing that Mary Beth, my business partner, is we're going to do this year, because sometimes we have 4 or 5 people on a job, is we're going to be wearing team shirts. We usually wear a black polo and khakis, and we're going to have our logo on the shirt, because I don't want any question that this person is working independently or has the ability to work independently. When they're with us, they're with us. So it's important to get that paperwork.
Going along with that, I think it's important that you make sure you've got all the legal things in place as far as 1099 employees, with them, signing an independent contractor agreement, so that you don't have that problem down the road, because that can really come back to bite you if you haven't done that. And also, I don't think it hurts to have them sign a non-compete agreement for, whatever is a reasonable amount of time, because I have had assistants who tried to poach clients, and that happens on a very regular basis. But getting back to what we were talking about previously about behavior, I think that's something that you have to teach, because I'm not sure that a lot of the people coming into the industry have that education, shall we say, about how to behave with clients, and certainly not how to behave with clients that are spending a lot of money and that you don't want to lose, and those kinds of things. And they've never been in a corporate situation. And so there are some things you need to tell them about how to dress and how to act, and that they need to bathe and shave, maybe. Yes. Those kinds of things. I mean, I had an assistant who was a great assistant, but he didn't bathe frequently enough. And that was a problem. Unless we were shooting outdoors, I couldn't use him. So there's just those little training issues. And I think that's less understood now than it maybe was 20, 30 years ago. I hate to keep harkening back to back in the good old days, but if you look at who we're competing with in some situations, who companies are hiring or who we're reshooting for, it's somebody that's just out of college, and they show up and they're kind of a mess, and they don't have any professional demeanor, and that's kind of the mindset. And so it takes some educating on our part, if we do hire those people, to say, this is how you need to act, and this is how you need to behave. And like Brad was talking about, sometimes we end up with high profile people, or we're in somebody's home that's a very high profile person, and we don't want them going gaga over the family pictures. Just stay here and do the job with me. Yeah, that's a picture of his yacht, but please don't call it out. So anyway, that's just a personal thing that I think manners are so important to make this really work. Carl, you had something there.
Yeah. Hate to keep going back to ASMP, but that's a lot of my experience. We've actually had a couple of assistant workshops where, in an effort to grow our assistant base in Connecticut, we've had full day or evening seminars where we go through all sorts of things, and one of them is on-set etiquette, and then some of it is working with various lighting and wrapping cords correctly, and just kind of the basics, because a lot of people just don't know how to do it, and they're not going to tell you until it's, you're on the set, let's say, or on the shoot. So that's another thing that certainly ties into what you're saying, Alan. Very important to kind of talk to them. And I always tell my people, if I haven't worked with them before, I'm like, these are the expectations, and this is what you can't do this. Put your cell phone away. I want your full attention. You're being paid well, and your full attention, and don't talk to the client unnecessarily. Don't promote yourself. Don't talk about other shoots that you've been on, etc. This year we did a bowling team kind of an event with AIA, and so my assistants all got logo T-shirts, which we haven't used a lot on shoots, but they're available if it's appropriate. So that's another way to kind of brand yourself and make it look like you have a cohesive group of regular employees, when in fact they may actually be freelance assistants that you don't work with every time, but quite often.
I think that's
I would say
on that note of go ahead.
I was just going to say the Ohio Valley chapter of ASMP has done similar assistant workshops probably every other year.
All right, I'm gonna check if LA does that. But yeah, as far as the on-set etiquette, I've been, like I said, that's where I started filmmaking. So when I was on a professional film shoot, I was taught that you only talk to higher up the chain. So I was in the camera department, so camera assisting, which is loading the film, or nowadays would be loading the digital media. Then you'll talk to the second AC, then the first AC, then the director. You'll never talk to the actor at all, because the only person in their ear should be the director, script supervisor, or wardrobe that they'll be talking to. Otherwise, they need to be focused. So I was taught that way. So I do bring in the film and filmmaking experience with my assistants. Say, hey, yeah, you don't talk to clients, especially when I'm hiring a videographer. So when Barry, you told me that story, it's kind of interesting that's like filmmaking etiquette there, like, because on a film set, you do not talk to the talent at all.
I think that's really good. A good model. The traditional film set is a really good model, because those lines are very clear, and you just don't cross them. And
no, your last day on set.
Yeah.
Also, there's another thing that I learned. I never assisted. I only assisted after I turned pro, which is kind of the opposite of what everybody else does. And a friend of mine, this is not architecture, she was a portrait photographer. She was pretty successful. And she had a gig shooting a portrait for CEO magazine. It was going to be the cover. And she was shooting Ephraim Zimbalist III. And so I had not done much portraiture at that point, and we went in and we set everything up, and we're going to have about 20 minutes, as these things often go. And it was an incredibly boring conference room, and she spent 10 minutes talking to him. And I just thought, why aren't you shooting? Why aren't you shooting? You've got only another 10 minutes. So what I learned from that was that of course, she relaxed him, and she got much better photos than she would have gotten if we had just dove in. And I was a baby at this. I knew how to do architecture, but you don't have to talk to the kitchen cabinets to get them to look right. You just have to, straighten them up. So that was a big lesson for me in terms of client relations also. So that now applies to, an architect or a designer. If I go in, I'm not going to start shooting right away. I'm going to talk with them for a little bit, especially if I don't know them, if I'm meeting them for the first time or something like that. And I think assistants need to understand that the human component of all this is so incredibly critical for all kinds of reasons, including relaxed people are just easier to get along with. So when you have a problem later on, when the sprinklers are going to come on when you're standing on the lawn, you're more likely to be able to find somebody to shut them off, or find some other alternative. Anyway, I'm just making this up as I go. You get my general drift.
Barry, I hate to say it, your stories bring memories back to me that are fun. But again, when I was working with Avidon, when we were shooting Michael J. Fox for the cover of GQ magazine, or Mel Gibson he would, like 48 hours before that cover shoot, Avedon would rent every single Michael J. Fox movie, read up everything he knew about Michael J. Fox. And when Michael J. Fox walked in the studio, he was the biggest Michael J. Fox fan in the world.
Yeah.
And then when he took him on set, Michael J. Fox is like, I'm on the cover of GQ magazine. Richard Avedon's doing my portrait. He was putty in Avedon's hand, and Avedon could have him sit on his head in the corner, and Michael J. Fox would be like, whatever you need me to do. 48 hours after Michael J. Fox, Avedon couldn't tell you fuck about Michael J. Fox.
Right.
It was all a show, and it was all him to be able to get that person to be able to do what he needed him to do at that moment in time.
Well, this is something that I think, because I teach business practices, and I've done, classes and workshops. I'm about to start another class in San Francisco for the City College. I think that one of the things that young people who are going to be assistants or even photographers, if they're going to skip over, don't understand is how much work goes into the prep. So you look at somebody like Avedon and you think, well, you don't need to do anything. He's Avedon. He just shows up and he's a genius and all the rest of it. And what I think a lot of young people don't recognize is how much work prep goes into what we do in advance, not just the technical work, but also the, who your client is, you've looked at their website, you know kind of what photos they might expect or what you want to surpass, certainly, and all of that. And so that level of intensity and work going into it means you can't ever relax. And I think a lot of young people don't understand. They think you reach a certain point and you can chill, right? It's all kind of automatic after that, and you just kind of groove on. And I don't know how to get that across other than just to talk to them directly about it, or just have them watch you do it. I'll tell a story. I think I may have even told this story before. This guy, PJ McMullen, who I just mentioned, who I use in LA, who doesn't do videos, by the way, as far as I know, but he was great. We had a long day shoot, and we ended up having to go back to my hotel room. And we were hanging out. And while we were there, I get an email from a potential client. And I said to him, I'm going to talk to this person and this and that. And I realized pretty quickly he had never really seen this process. And I said to him, I'm going to have to turn out a proposal right now. Do you want me to walk you through it? And nobody had ever taken him aside to say, these are the nuts and bolts of what goes into an agreement. And or even what I explained to him is in my initial phone call, these are the questions I'm going to ask. And this is why, because it's all going to go into this. And it's all about showing that I'm competent at the same time and a problem solver for them. This is somebody I'd never worked for before. So I think that that's something that was so valuable for him, but nobody had done that for him before. I was kind of shocked. Again, I was going back to some of the things that people were saying earlier when I wasn't visible, which is I don't worry about him taking my place, and it just seemed like the right thing to do.
Yeah, I like, if I could just interject, you're always looking for topics. And I don't know if you've done this in the past because I've only been on for a year with you guys, but nuts and bolts of our business. I mean, I think that's a great topic because there is so many, things in the past. I get photographers call me, hey, Norman, how do you license something or what kind of contracts do you have? Or what do you do with an assistant, like we're talking about agreements and so forth. I think sharing those among each other. I had one photographer call me and he sent me this license agreement. It was like 10 pages long. Mine's a sheet of paper with 2 paragraphs in it. And I sent him that back and he goes, what's this? That's my agreement. And he still uses it today. But it's so important because you don't want to scare your client in that professionalism. Yeah, right, Barry, that's a great story.
Also, by the way, in terms of long contracts, a lawyer explained to me when I was a contractor, he said, the longer a contract is, the more loopholes and problems you can have. The simpler that it is, the less argumentation
That's
is
exactly
possible.
what my counsel told me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I like sharing those things, and if it helps somebody, great. I think that's the camaraderie. We need that back. I'm telling you.
I think that's
good old days.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and maybe we ought to consider that for the next time, because I'm just thinking of all the prep that goes in. Once I get the phone call from somebody, it's a client I've never worked for, then I have to start studying, and there's a lot that goes into that to make it look like, when I show up on set, that I know all about them.
Oh yeah,
everything they've done, and I know exactly what you want, and it doesn't happen that way very easily. So I appreciate
sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, even if you don't know everything about them, just taking a few minutes to talk to them and ask them questions about themselves. Everybody likes talking about themselves. So you could consider it stroking, but that's social interaction. It's all stroking back
I don't think
all day long.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to make friends with your client.
No, it's much more better. And again, one of the things that I say too is that in terms of client relations is, I always, and I know I've said this before, I always offer to take, if I'm doing residential work, I always offer to take pictures of their dog or their kid or something like that. It's really pretty easy. I'm not going to spend 2 hours in post on a photograph, but most people don't take me up on it. But what it does do is it, on the part of the homeowner, who I'm really concerned with, is what if I have to go back, right? Or what if I have to stay longer or come earlier? So just creating any kind of trust with them means my life is going to be easier professionally. And so it's such a tiny thing to do. Plus, as I say, they almost never take me up on it. I do, by the way, often grab the photos anyway and send it to them. And some of those are on my website.
Cool.
Yeah, I think another part of that's really important is when you're showing up, especially if it's a large scale production. I learned this at a seminar. It was just a 3-day business seminar. The only thing I ever learned was this statement: when in command, take charge.
Oh yeah.
And that's so important, because they're hiring you. That gives them security. You're the professional. You're the problem solver. You're the one there directing things. And when they see you do that, they have confidence in your abilities, and they'll follow direction. They'll follow right in suit. But if you go there hemming and hawing and wondering, you're out of a job in no time. In command, take charge. So.
Thanks, Norman. I think we're going to wrap this up here. June, I hope this has been helpful to you personally.
It has, actually. It has.
I love Brad's and Barry's stories. Are fantastic.
And thanks for sharing those. Those are such cool insights, and I really appreciate how forthcoming everybody's been on this. I think we'll probably, maybe have some follow-up to this at some point. And I'm just wondering if it would even be worthwhile to maybe have a directory of assistants throughout the country that we feel comfortable with. I don't know. I don't want to, reinvent something ASMP has already done, but
I could recommend some. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and maybe even if we need an assistant, maybe we just shoot one another an email and just say, do you know of somebody in this? Because we kind of cross paths across the country all the time.
I always do. I do that all the time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I found the guy who, handed the client his card, and then in the parking lot as we were leaving at 10 in the morning, handed me a joint, which was the final thing that I said, I don't mind the joint part, but handing me a joint in a parking lot in the middle of the morning in broad daylight, where the potential client could have seen it, I just thought, you know what? Sorry.
It's bad judgment.
Sorry, I've digressed.
Hey, Brad.
Well, if anybody has somebody looking for a full-time assistant job, please send them my way.
Yeah.
The job search is on.
We're all going to look at Brad differently now, knowing that he worked with Abaddon. So
yeah.
Oh yeah.
You should listen to Brad's interview that's on YouTube on our
that's
channel.
really cool.
Very interesting information. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody. I hope that you have a good first quarter, and let's do this again next month. we'll come up with some topics, and hopefully it'll be something that everybody's happy to talk about. Thanks again for being here and taking the time out of your day, and have a good weekend.
All right.
Thank you, Alan, for putting it together.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks.
Bye.
Have a
Thanks,
good day.
everyone.
Bye.
This has been another episode of A Photographer's Life. If you've enjoyed this program, please let us know by liking this episode and subscribing to this channel. A Photographer's Life is brought to you by the Association of Independent Architectural Photographers. This episode is copyrighted, and may not be used in full or in part, without the written permission of the AIAP. Please join us again soon for another inside look at the world of professional architectural photography.